seen happens too often every day. Death by overdose on heroin.
In the past few years, the number of deaths due to overdose on heroin has risen dramatically in Ohio.
The problem is widespread and it has an impact on all of us.
It cuts across all economic levels and makes its way into all types of neighborhoods, whether it be inner city or upper-class suburb.
We all need to be more aware of this problem and know what we can do to stop it.
Let's first take a look at the cause of this problem.
I think one of the reasons that we're seeing an increase in heroin has to do with the situation of what began in the past as an effort by law enforcement to combat the prescription drug abuse. And as we clamp down more on that and work to eliminate that, I think heroin has kind of taken the place of that situation that we had in the past.
We're losing about 6 to 7 people a day from unintentional drug overdoses. When you look at the statistics for heroin, it's about 3 to 4 people a day. And those statistics that I'm referencing are a couple years old. So we know that we still have a problem. We know that fentanyl and now carfentanil, which is, is something that they use on large animals at the zoo as a tranquilizer, is a problem in our neighborhoods and with our kids and with our parents. There are no boundaries on this drug.
Well, I think one of the reasons that heroin, the availability of it has increased is because there's a lot of incentive from every drug dealer to keep their clientele hooked on a very addictive, a substance that will keep their people they're dealing to coming back over and over again. Whereas somebody may use a marijuana dealer once in a while, they'll be back to that heroin dealer every chance they get because the heroin's so addictive.
Yeah, there is an increase in rural areas due to pricing. Maybe a berry of heroin in Columbus would cost you about $8. Here, farther away from the city and the travel, dealers are getting about $20 for those same berries. So it didn't take long for the big city dealers to understand that they've got a group of clientele, in a rural area like Mount Vernon, they can come here and make a lot more profit.
In some of the suburbs, it's a little bit easier perhaps to fly under the radar. They hope to perhaps catch law enforcement a little off guard in some of the rural areas. They're kind of playing it with carrying smaller amounts of the drug. They don't carry any weapons. They try to fly under the radar and just stay hidden as long as possible. So I think that's why they're kind of spreading out into that territory.
Heroin is definitely increasing among teens because it is so cheap and it is so easy to get, and it is a very fast high, and they're addicted almost immediately.
Opium contains the active ingredient morphine, which was identified in the 1840s and purified. So morphine is more potent than opium because it contains the pure active ingredient. The hypodermic needle was invented by an Englishman in the 1850s and was used almost exclusively for morphine injections. Morphine is much more effective if injected than if it's taken orally. This is a molecular model of the morphine molecule. Each of the beads that you see is one atom. The black beads represent carbon atoms, and the white ones represent hydrogen atoms. Most of the atoms are carbon and hydrogen. The 3 red atoms are oxygen, and this lone blue one at the top is nitrogen. Heroin is a more potent drug than morphine because it can get into the brain more readily. However, once it's inside the brain, something has to happen to it before it can exert its effect. Inside our brain, we have an enzyme that's able to remove these extra pieces, replace them with hydrogen, and that has converted the heroin molecule back into morphine again. That's important because the molecule needs to fit into a receptor And if my hand is the receptor, it goes in this way. If the acetyl group had been covering over this oxygen atom, that would make it too large and it would not be able to enter the receptor. So it's actually morphine that causes the drug effects in our brain, but heroin is a more powerful version of morphine because these extra pieces helped to transport the drug into the brain faster. The same group of chemists who invented aspirin worked on morphine. Morphine had its undesirable side effects, and they thought they could improve it, and so these chemists used the same chemical reaction that created aspirin to add some groups to morphine. And then one of the scientists in the laboratory tried it. He loved the feeling of power that it gave him. He said that it made him feel heroic, and so Bayer named their product Heroin.
I think that most people in the state of Ohio would be shocked to learn that Ohio is second in the nation in unintentional overdose deaths. On average, there are 7 people in the state of Ohio dying per day.
Heroin does more than create problems for the user.
It also has a negative impact on their families.
The physical effects of heroin on the body are many and devastating. If you've ever seen a picture of a patient or somebody before they started using heroin and after, you can see quite a difference between the two.
Psychologically, heroin can be extremely devastating. The drug itself, when a person does not have the drug in their system, they can experience drug-induced depression to clinical severity, to the point where they might become very suicidal, very despondent, really wanting to isolate themselves, having a lot of low self-esteem.
Heroin totally destroys families. The family typically has to shun the family member in order to get peace, because the family member will steal and rob and just destroy any relationship to get what they want.
Way back in high school, Carl participated in alcohol and pot, and then later it ventured out into pills, and we finally realized that he was using, you could smell the pot, and a lot of the kids nowadays are switching to pills because you can't smell it. But Carl just progressed. He was competitive, and the guys he ran with, very good kids, but they were making poor peer decisions, and it just kept escalating. It was kind of like, I'll do it if you do it, I can do it, you know, that type of thing. And it escalated and eventually led to heroin.
Holly Noel started using with prescription meds. A friend of hers got into it, and she was curious about it and decided to try it as well. That only lasted just a couple of weeks, and I knew something was going on, and sat her down and asked her, you know, what are you doing? What's going on? I can tell something's happening. And she told us the truth. And we were very ignorant of the whole thing, dealing with addiction and how it affected a person.
I think I figured out Jake was up to something. There was change in behavior. I think that as he progressed in his use, there was a sense of defensiveness that would come up quickly. If I asked questions, the immediate defense would come up. And there were a couple occasions where I did catch him with actual stuff on him, and which prompted me to drug test, which I thought I was doing the right thing, but little did I know he was actually wearing this contraption around his waist where he was getting urine from a buddy who didn't use drugs, and so his tests were always coming up negative.
Carl was living at home, and his bedroom was upstairs above our family room, and he overdosed about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon and fell off his bed, so we heard a thud. We ran upstairs and realized what had happened. I couldn't get a pulse, and he didn't appear to be breathing, so I immediately started CPR on him while my wife called 911, and we could hear the sirens coming in the background, and I'm working on Carl, but I'm not getting anywhere.
For over a year, her and her fiance both had gotten clean, and were doing good, and something really bad had happened at work, and she felt like, to be able to face her boss that next day, that she needed to use to be able to go into work. And that batch of heroin, it was 3 times more powerful than anything they had ever seen, which is one of the reasons why I believe fentanyl was mixed into it. It killed her instantly.
Following Carl's overdose, he was life-flighted to Riverside Hospital, where he was in a coma for 2 days, and then we lost him. While at the hospital, Ellen and I talked about, we've got to do something to help prevent this from happening to other families. And I developed a speaking program, and it has developed over the years. And for the past 7 years, I've spoken to over 17,000 young people.
I feel incredibly lucky that Jake sought out rehab before an attempted suicide was successful. I feel very, very lucky. It breaks my heart when I meet a parent who has lost a child to addiction.
So it took a long time, a very long time, and I still am not always okay. I'm not the person I used to be. I never will be. That was a part of the whole situation that I didn't expect, and I struggled with the most, because the day that I buried Holly, I buried myself, or the person that I was. And so it's been difficult finding me again.
Since Carl passed, I put together this PowerPoint presentation, and I talk a lot about peer pressures, positive peer pressures, and it's very casual and fun with the young people, and they don't realize that Carl had passed until we get way into it. And I talk about Carl being raised in a small town, just your average child, involved in Little League and sports, and honor student in the National Honor Society, very popular with his classmates, funny, one of the funniest guys you'd ever want to know. And then it builds up. We talk about holidays and holiday gatherings with a large family, and just I casually tell the young people that, you know, Carl won't be at this Easter dinner or whatever the holiday is of the time, that he won't be able to make it because, and this is where I hit them with what happened to Carl. And the tone of the presentation changes right there at that turning point. And I talk to the young people about how the decisions they make affect for generations. And this is our granddaughter Carly, who was named after Carl. And we'll never know how cool Carl was.
I created a Facebook group, and the original intent was just a place for all of Holly's friends and family to get together and remember her. And together we came up with the name Holly's Song of Hope. It wasn't me, that was everyone that was in the group. We would post stuff about her, stuff about heroin, started learning things. I started posting questions, and in 6 months' time, we were very close to 1,000 people.
So it's been multifaceted probably, but I think the biggest thing has just been making sure Jake knows he's loved and supported, and I don't even like to entertain that word relapse. I just won't go there.
Addiction can take place quickly.
And it can lead to a devastating life.
Started using when I was 14, and I started with marijuana and partying all the time and finding pills at parties, and then pills got too expensive and I pretty much went straight to heroin.
Using drugs in high school, it started off as just a way to fit in.
I got started using out of sheer curiosity, seeing other friends doing drugs of different sorts and types. I wanted to fit in somewhat and do what they were doing, especially with older kids. So I started smoking weed and drinking alcohol, and as I got older, things escalated, and I began using other drugs of harder form.
And then I found a guy who partied just like I did and did the same kind of lifestyle choices I did. And he was an opiate addict, and we were both in recovery for a short amount of time. And we didn't stay that way, made poor choices, and before you know it, I was hooked on his drug of choice, which would have been opiates and heroin.
My cousin came over and asked me if I want to get high with him. And being 14 at the time, I was a little naive, more than I am today. And when he didn't tell me that it was heroin, I knew it was a powder, and that I assumed it was a pill. And I, again, didn't assume to ask the question of what it was. I tried it, I snorted a line, and the second I felt it, I was addicted to heroin, full blown. I told my cousin out loud that I wanted to do heroin every day for the rest of my life.
Using when I was in high school to begin with marijuana, drinking my sophomore year. By the time it progressed into college, I was trying cocaine. And then I was a bartender downtown, and I got somebody showed me Oxycontins. And, I started using those, which is an opiate based. And then when those got too expensive, I went to my dealer and asked him if he had some more pills to sell me, and he said no. So he said, but you can try this and it's free. So I tried it, and I became addicted to heroin.
Yeah, my drug usage, eventually I became highly addicted. It first started off with painkillers, opiates, and later on it became speed, things such as meth, crack, and eventually heroin. But it kind of progressed up the scale.
I became addicted within 2 months of using. With using on the weekends and everything else, it became a daily use for me very quickly.
I got addicted over the course of a little bit. It didn't take me very long to get addicted to drugs. I started off addicted to drugs like weed and alcohol. I wouldn't say it was more of a daily use, but it was more of the way I used when I did. And as I progressed, I was pretty much addicted to anything I could put into my body.
It took me probably 2 weeks to become physically addicted to heroin.
A lot of changes happened to me just with my whole person. My brain began to think differently. I became more debased in my thinking and my intellect. I started to live kind of moment by moment. Physically, my body was losing weight. I was becoming sick. I would have abdominal pain. Just my mental health altogether started to really deteriorate. I started seeing things that weren't real.
Emotionally, I pretty much lost the ability to feel and to have emotions.
The things that changed for me was my attitude was the biggest thing. I started rebelling against everything and didn't want to do anything with anybody. I wanted to isolate myself.
I was all about drugs. I did anything I could to get them, from stealing to robbing my family, too many crimes, to barely keeping a job, living out of my car.
The withdrawals were terrible for me. It was like the flu times 100. I was getting sick. I, couldn't stay away from the toilet. It was restless legs. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat.
Heroin was different, and it didn't take any amount of time to get to a point where you have to withdraw. There's no getting around it. And sleep isn't real. It's not even a thing. And I felt like I went nuts because I couldn't grasp why I was still alive.
I remember times just screaming into my pillow, just from the agony of not having the drug. And then even in the long term, not just even initially, but in the long term, it took a long time for my brain just to heal from certain thinking patterns.
But I hurt in my bones. My back hurt, but not just like your back hurts, like in your bones, You couldn't eat, but you're starving and you lose your bowels. And, because who knows how long it's been since you've had a normal bowel movement, because that's what opiates do.
An average day for me was I would wake up and I would contemplate where I was getting money from. I would usually steal something. I would have to find somebody or think of a way to steal anything I possibly could just to be okay for that day. And as soon as I was okay, I would do it all over again all day long.
You live moment by moment, and so you don't think ahead, but you're always thinking and scheming of how I could get money, where I could get drugs, who could I steal from today.
My cousin, who I started doing heroin with, was always, we'd always go out, and for several years we went and we'd do crimes all day long, crime after crime after crime.
All you're on your mind is getting that first shot. So in that process, I would have to either hustle somebody for some money, go out and commit a crime, or manipulate my family somehow to enable me to get me money, lie to a friend or a family member or cousin to somehow get the money going so I could get well, and then continue on that process the rest of the day to keep stealing, robbing, cheating, whatever I could do to continue getting high.
My turning point was I got in trouble with the law, and it was my first time being in trouble with the law, and I ended up going to prison.
I died on my mom's birthday, May 12th, 2014. I was told by my drug dealer that I wasn't supposed to do all of what I had got from him, and it was stronger and new. And being young and dumb, I thought I knew better than he did, and I didn't. I ended up in the hospital for the night on my mom's birthday, and the next day I made the decision that I wasn't going to do it anymore. I went back on my word for not doing it the rest of my life.
After the second overdose, I realized the first thing I said to the gentleman I was with was, "Are we out?" And later that day or the next day, I told him that I'd surrendered to addiction and I was going to die this way, and I was good with it. Whatever the junkie lifestyle had in store for me, I was down, And then like 2 weeks later, I could see people's faces and hear their voices, and it was like something just came down and touched me on the head. You're gonna die, and I mean it. What are you gonna do?
The thing that turned me around and led me to recovery was really taking into perspective where my life had gone in terms of my relationships with my family, my old friends, the people that loved me and supported me the most. And more than anything, I would say the lack of love I had for myself. I hated myself. I hated my life. I was suicidal.
What's helped me most in recovery has to be the support group I have around me. I have some of the most amazing friends and people around me that growing up or while I was addicted to heroin, I didn't even know these kind of people existed. So
The best help for me is doing my 12-step program and contacting women and having a circle of women to count on. Men too, but mostly for me it's women. Being able to contact them no matter what and being able to share what's really going on in my life.
For me, the most beautiful part of recovery is I have an awareness of myself and it's real. And there's this unity amongst us, people in recovery that really live a recovered lifestyle. We're brothers and sisters fighting a fight.
I think the first thing that I would say to anybody who's contemplating on using is focus on what you want in life, because it doesn't matter whether you pick up once or twice, you could immediately become addicted to it, and it's not something that you can stop right away.
I know a lot of the times people want to use because their friends are using, and sometimes it looks attractive, and you might even be popular if you do use drugs, but it's not worth it in the end. It is a lie, and it will not only strip you from your family and your hobbies, but it'll eventually take your life.
We are taking this problem seriously in Ohio and are doing something about it.
We are fighting this problem on a number of fronts with a determination to make a difference.
Some of the ways that we have attempted to combat the problem locally is not just with enforcement, but it is also services that we have tried to provide to those who are addicted or inmates of the correctional system. We provide long-term counseling options as well as short-term counseling options for those who are inmates, as well as long-term rehab situations that we've tried to help fund.
As far as law enforcement and decriminalizing the addict, we in our community have made a movement toward more treatment rather than sending these people to prison. Prison is not rehabilitative for the addiction survivor. And now we even have our officers being trained. We have a thing called DART, where if a person ODs, they go to the hospital and DART helps them get into treatment, not jail or prison.
Law enforcement's taking a different approach now with the heroin issue. We're focusing a lot of energy right now on treatment of the addiction. We've got drug courts in place, trying to get these folks help, trying to get them the tools to deal with the addiction themselves.
So we have protocols that we treat patients that come in for withdrawal, and basically they're PRN medications or medications that are as needed to control the symptoms, which would be some of the ones that we talked about with the nausea or the tremors or the stomach pain, the diarrhea. So we treat all of those individually as they have symptoms, and we have a specific protocol that's outlined with all those medications.
The name of the drug that I use is Vivitrol. It does come in a pill form. We do not use the pill form very often because most of the people that come in to the clinic have had a drug problem for quite some time, and maybe their drug of choice was Percocet. So we don't want to get them used to the pills because they have a choice whether to take it or not, and they could have withdrawal and not even realize what they're doing. Whereas when they get the Vivitrol, the injectable form, it stays in the system for about 28 days, and then they would return to the clinic every 28 days. With the Vivitrol injection, they would receive counseling, which of course is one of the most intricate parts of receiving the injection, because the mind and body works together, and so usually there's an underlying reason why they begin taking the drugs to begin with, and so anxiety plays into that. So sometimes we will, when they come back for their second injection, we'll say, how did you do? Did you have any withdrawal? Do you feel like using? That's my big question to them. Do you feel like you have the need to use? And 99.9 of them say no. It made me forget the very thing I thought I wanted. And however, I am still anxious, so I treat the anxiety with a non-narcotic medication to help them with their counseling and use of the medication. The Vivitrol injection does not. It's a non-narcotic. There is not any withdrawal from that injection, so they could be on it 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. The recommended dosage is 1 year because they want to make sure that the patient's body and mind are in the same place, and that they're safe. The only problem is if you have a patient that has been court-ordered and they're not really serious about the drug and getting clean, the problem would arise when they would decide to go back and use again, because they may think that they're just going to start at the same depth of drug use that they were using prior to taking the Vivitrol injection, and that is potentially lethal to them.
That is why it's important for patients to understand that a physical medication that's being given to them is going to be one piece of their recovery. That psychological impact and the social impact for people is a great factor in why people relapse. I think when they begin to feel physically a little bit better, they think they can go out and conquer the world and that everything's going to be okay. And once they're presented with something negative or something happens in their life, they automatically go back to what they know, which was using, and that's how they've dealt with and managed to deal with their life. So we really help point them in the right direction to make sure that they understand it's not just the physical recovery, which takes a long time. That's a long process in itself, but that emotional and psychological impact is really where they have to understand. It's about relearning techniques and coping skills.
My organization, we actually have housed people for 8, 9, 10 years at a time. Not because they weren't ready or irresponsible or anything like that, but it has been around and it's been a proven practice of those that have lived through an addiction as a stepping stone, as a means of support. So that's what recovery housing or step-down housing does. It's been around since the 1800s. It's not a new concept, but most of the results are the long-term recovery results that everybody's looking for in addiction.
I have a success story of a man who came into the service to work with us here at the hospital, and he recovered. It's been almost 2 years ago now, and he has continually called in about every 2 months to give us a report and an update that he has now become a peer support for other people, and he continues to encourage people to go through treatment and understand how much his life has changed, and he is a beacon of hope.
Heroin use, as well as other illegal drugs, is a serious problem in our state.
We can all do something about it.
Life is too precious to risk it on drug use that does more harm than good.
Become a positive force in your school, in your neighborhood, and among your friends.
When Governor Kasich took office, one of the first things he did was establish the Governor's Cabinet Opiate Action Team. And the purpose of that was to take leaders from state agencies, Job and Family Services, Department of Health, Medicaid, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and say, clearly we have a problem. How are we going to address it from each one of these state systems? The other thing that he did, aside from pulling that cabinet together, was he started a program called Start Talking. And the goal of this program is to decrease the number of people who ever become addicted by using prevention services. And those prevention services are simply to have conversations with young people about the very real disease of addiction and to set them up with resiliency factors so that they never become addicted to begin with. We know the younger you start talking to young people about the realities of drug abuse and drug addiction, that it is not a moral issue or a moral deficit, but a disease, the less likely they are to ever become addicted.
And we also want to focus on prevention so that we can prevent those folks needing treatment or even having the challenges. And further, we believe in long-term recovery that requires the appropriate recovery supports, including housing and all the AA groups and everything, to make sure that folks can get all the supports they need to really succeed in recovery.
When I first heard the word ACEs, I was thinking about, oh, we're going to play cards. This is a card game. Well, it wasn't. It was an acronym that stood for Adverse Childhood Experiences. That intrigued me as a superintendent. So as I looked into the ACEs study, realizing the number of adverse experiences that our children can experience in growing up, and the adverse effect it has on their health, on their education, on their behavior, and quite frankly on their future lives, was astounding. And so the first thing for us was becoming aware of what ACEs was about, becoming aware of these experiences that our children go through. They're the silent minority, quite frankly, of some of the things that happen. So we've really taken off on this ACEs piece. We've introduced it to our entire staff. Again, information is power. And once you begin to realize the importance of what goes on before they walk in our doors and how it can affect students, I think you then take over the power of being able to help them cope and deal with those kinds of experiences. We've done some things locally with our staff dealing with ACEs. We have a number of different buildings where we see a higher propensity for students who walk through our doors with issues, and they're doing some book studies. Again, we're using the positive behavioral instructional model. We're using a second steps approach. It's a social and emotional curriculum. We've also saw the importance enough that we've hired 3 social workers in the district to work specifically at our elementary levels. You know, we have guidance counselors at the middle school and the high school, but we've had very little support at the elementary level, and realizing that, we have implemented those social workers with really a targeted focus on meeting with students, meeting with groups of students, working towards connecting families to getting help and support.
If someone is looking to get help, whether that's with providing prevention education or treatment for an individual, either for a family member, friend, or themselves, we have a bridge line that's toll-free that they can contact on the state level. The other thing I recommend is getting in contact with the local alcohol, drug, and mental health board within your county, because they have prevention and treatment services that are much more readily available. They're going to know what's in your community. They also may know what your specific need is and link you to it much sooner.
Heroin is not something you want to experiment with. Don't even try it. Right now the national average is under 5% of folks that even try heroin for the first time ever fully recover.
Young people think they're invincible. They can drive as fast as they want without seatbelts. They can do strange things on skateboards and think they're invincible. They can also take a certain pill and think they'll be fine and they can handle it. If they realized the eventual path that this leads, the pills lead to heroin, heroin leads to a burial. I've told some young people that they may want to take their parents and go to the funeral home and pick out a casket ahead of time because that's where it leads.
Our government is seeing it. There are lots of people like myself who are on the phone and sending emails and sending letters and going to DC and calling out our government that, you know, this is an epidemic and it needs to be treated as such. And stuff is happening.
The disease of addiction is very stealth. It's very opportunistic, but it certainly can be prevented. One, again, if we educate ourselves on understanding what it is, but 2, if we also understand that everybody kind of has their own unique journey, and we're there to not just observe it, but sometimes to support them, especially in the process of recovery.